Have you ever stopped to wonder if the very silence of a peaceful morning is actually a mask for a storm brewing deep within your own veins? As a physician who has sat at the bedside of over 30,000 souls, I have come to realize that life's most devastating transitions often happen when the world feels most at rest. I am Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and after 3 decades of witnessing the fragile dance between life and death, I find myself sitting here in Atlanta, looking back at a specific Sunday in Savannah, Georgia that still haunts my clinical intuition. It was the kind of morning where the humidity was just a soft touch against the skin. The scent of blooming jasmine hung heavy in the air, and the sun rose with a slow amber deliberation. I was sitting on my porch, the steam from my coffee curling into the air, feeling a rare sense of stillness that only a Sunday can provide. I looked across the lawn and saw George Miller, my neighbor for more than 20 years, walking back from his mailbox with that familiar rhythmic stride. George was 72 years old, but he moved with the vigor of a man 2 decades younger, a testament to his years as a landscape architect who spent more time in the dirt than behind a desk. He caught my eye and flashed that trademark grin, waving a bundle of letters with a strength that suggested he was invincible. We had just celebrated his birthday the week before, and I remember joking with him that he was the only man I knew who could outwork a 30-year-old in a garden. He looked radiant, his skin bronzed by the sun, his eyes clear, the very picture of what we all hope to be in our twilight years. He didn't smoke, he limited his salt, and he walked 5 miles every single morning without fail. But as I watched him turn toward his front door, the atmosphere of the morning suddenly shifted, as if the air itself had grown heavy and cold. I didn't see the fall, but I heard it, a sound I have spent my career recognizing in hospital corridors, but never expected to hear on a quiet suburban street. It was a dull, heavy thud, the sound of a strong oak tree suddenly snapping at the roots. I dropped my coffee, the ceramic shattering on the porch, and I was running across the grass before I even realized I had stood up. I found George collapsed near his flower beds, his face pressed against the very soil he had spent 20 years nurturing. His body was unmoving, his breathing labored and stertorous, a terrifying sound that signaled a brain in profound distress. There was no warning, no cry for help, and no chance for a final goodbye to the wife who was still inside pouring her own cup of tea. In those frantic moments, as I checked his pulse and felt the frantic, irregular throb of his heart, I realized George was in the midst of a massive ischemic stroke. By the time the paramedics arrived, their sirens shattering the Sunday peace, I already knew in my doctor's heart that the George Miller I knew was gone. This man, who had done everything right by the book, was now a statistic in a war he didn't even know he was fighting. It was a moment of profound professional humility for me, a reminder that the silent killer doesn't care about your garden or your reputation. According to clinical research and data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, nearly 75% of all strokes occur in individuals over the age of 65. But the most terrifying part of George's story isn't the statistics. It's the fact that he appeared perfectly healthy on the outside while a catastrophic blockage was building quietly within his cerebral arteries. I sat with his family later, trying to explain how a man so vibrant could be struck down so suddenly, and the guilt in the room was suffocating. George's wife kept asking what they had missed, what symptom they had overlooked, and the truth I had to give her was the hardest part of my job. Stroke is often the result of silent, preventable conditions that accumulate like rust in a pipe, invisible until the day the pipe finally bursts. My 3 decades of clinical experience have taught me that we are often too focused on the symptoms we can see while ignoring the biological whispers of the body. George's tragedy became my mission, a catalyst that forced me to look deeper into why our elders are falling when they should be thriving. This isn't just medical data to me anymore. It is the faces of the 30,000 people who have trusted me with their lives. I have seen this same story play out in Savannah, in New York, and in every corner of this country where seniors are blindsided by a lack of awareness. We have been taught to fear the obvious, but it is the hidden causes, the ones that don't cause pain or fever, that truly steal our independence. As I look back on that Sunday, I realized that George wasn't just my neighbor. He was a warning to all of us that looking healthy is not the same as being safe. So today I want to take you on a journey through the 5 hidden causes of stroke that I have identified through years of research and bedside observation. This is a journey born from science, but fueled by the human heart and the desire to see you live a life free from the shadow of disability. I want to talk to you with the honesty of a friend and the precision of a surgeon about what is really happening inside your body as you age. Grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and let us explore how the smallest changes in your kitchen and your daily rhythm can be the difference between a thud on the grass and a long, beautiful life. We are going to look at the invisible forces that took George, and we are going to learn how to fight back one heartbeat at a time. Do you believe that a feeling of perfect health could be your body's most dangerous deception? I often think of Evelyn Cartwright when I ask this. Evelyn was the heartbeat of Martha's Vineyard, a woman 68 years young whose life was defined by the aroma of blueberries and warmth. For decades, she was the librarian who knew every child's favorite book, and in retirement, she became the community's grandmother, hosting book clubs and baking muffins that felt like a hug in every bite. I visited her often, watching her trim her own hedges with a vigor that put younger men to shame. She always told me with a playful glint in her eyes that she felt stronger than a coastal gale. There were no headaches, no dizzy spells, and no blurred vision to warn her that a storm was gathering within her own cardiovascular system. She was living the American dream of aging, or so it seemed on the surface. Everything shattered on a Tuesday morning that started with the same domestic rhythm she had followed for 40 years. Her daughter, Sarah, arrived to find the kitchen filled with the smell of scorched muffins, but the oven timer was still ticking away into a terrifying silence. Evelyn was slumped over the marble island, her face, usually so full of light, drooping on the right side like melting wax. When I arrived at the hospital to consult on her case, the sight was a physical blow to my heart. This vibrant woman could no longer form words. Her speech was a slurred, unintelligible murmur that broke Sarah's heart with every attempt. We rushed her to imaging, but the most telling piece of data came from the simple pressure cuff. Her blood pressure was a staggering 190 over 110. It was a silent killer that had been eroding her life from the inside out for perhaps a decade or more. In my 30 years of practice, having treated over 30,000 patients, I have seen this tragedy repeat itself with haunting frequency. We call hypertension the silent killer because it is a phantom. It doesn't cause pain until it causes catastrophe. Imagine your arteries as delicate silk tubes designed to carry a gentle stream, suddenly forced to endure the pressure of a high-powered fire hose. Over time, that relentless force creates microscopic scarring and inflammation in the tiny vessels of the brain, leading to two deadly paths: an ischemic stroke where a clot forms in the damage, or a hemorrhagic stroke where the vessel simply gives way and bleeds into the mind. Clinical data from the American Heart Association and the CDC reveals a chilling reality. Nearly 2 out of every 3 Americans over the age of 60 suffer from high blood pressure, yet only 25% have it under control. Millions are walking on a crumbling bridge, convinced the ground is solid because they feel fine. Evelyn looked at me from her hospital bed, her eyes swimming with a mixture of terror and confusion that I will never forget. She had ignored the occasional high readings at the pharmacy kiosk because she didn't feel sick, and that is the great lie of hypertension. The damage is cumulative, a slow-motion car crash happening within your neck and skull every hour of every day. As a researcher who has spent years studying the vascular health of seniors, I knew that Evelyn's stroke was entirely preventable if we had only managed the numbers. She had hosted her book clubs and laughed with her grandkids while her brain was fighting a war it was destined to lose. The tragedy wasn't just the stroke itself, but the lost years of independence that followed. I sat with Sarah in the hallway, looking at the charts that showed the sheer force Evelyn's heart had been exerting just to keep her alive. We often think of stroke as a sudden bolt of lightning, but for someone like Evelyn, it was a long, rainy season that finally caused a landslide. I have spent my life's work trying to convince people that the absence of pain is not the presence of health. We must learn to fear the quiet numbers on a blood pressure cuff more than we fear the flu or a broken bone. Evelyn survived, but the cost was her right hand, the hand that turned the pages of her books and mixed the batter for her muffins. Her daughter now has to bake those muffins, and every time I see them, I'm reminded of the silent pressure that steals the best of us when we aren't looking. When I looked into Evelyn's eyes during her recovery, I didn't just see a patient. I saw a woman who needed a new way to fight for her life. I told her that while medicine has its place, her greatest allies were waiting for her in the humble aisles of the grocery store. I have long advocated for the kitchen pharmacy because in my experience with 30,000 patients, the food we choose is the most powerful drug we can ever take. We started her journey with a warm bowl of steel-cut oatmeal every morning, enriched with a tablespoon of ground flaxseed. Oatmeal contains a specific type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan, which acts like a biological sponge, soaking up bad LDL cholesterol before it can harden into the plaques that choke the brain. By adding flaxseed, she was flooding her system with lignans and omega-3 fatty acids, which scientific studies from Harvard have shown can significantly reduce arterial inflammation and lower blood pressure over time. I watched Evelyn's skepticism turn into hope as we mapped out a menu that felt more like a gourmet feast than a medical diet. We brought in the green giants and spinach, Swiss chard, and kale, which are packed with potassium and natural nitrates. These nitrates are converted by the body into nitric oxide, a miracle molecule that tells the smooth muscles of the arteries to relax and dilate, allowing blood to flow like a calm river rather than a pressurized jet. I told her to saute them lightly in extra virgin olive oil and garlic, making the medicine taste like a memory of Italy. Then we introduced the vibrant, earthy power of beet juice. Research indicates that drinking just 6 ounces of unsweetened beet juice can lead to a significant drop in blood pressure within hours. It is nature's own vasodilator, a deep red shield for the brain. We didn't stop there. We added low-fat Greek yogurt to her snack list, providing a trifecta of calcium, magnesium, and probiotics. Calcium isn't just for bones. It's essential for the electrical signals that tell your blood vessels when to contract and when to release. To satisfy her craving for a crunch, I prescribed a small handful of unsalted walnuts and almonds daily. These nuts are rich in magnesium, a mineral that I call the great relaxer because it helps keep the artery walls flexible and resilient. For her afternoon ritual, we replaced her sugary juice with hibiscus tea. Multiple clinical trials, including those from Tufts University, have demonstrated that 3 cups of hibiscus tea a day can be as effective as some entry-level blood pressure medications without the side effects. Beyond the plate, I taught Evelyn the art of internal hydration. Many seniors stop drinking water to avoid nighttime trips to the bathroom, but dehydration makes the blood thick and viscous, forcing the heart to work twice as hard to push it through the system. I urged her to aim for 6 to 8 cups of pure water a day, flavored perhaps with a slice of lemon or cucumber. We also implemented the post-meal stroll, a gentle 10-minute walk after lunch and dinner. This simple movement helps the body process sodium more efficiently and improves the overall circulation from the legs back to the heart. I also taught her a 5-minute deep breathing exercise to perform before bed, a technique that calms the sympathetic nervous system and prevents the dangerous nocturnal spikes in pressure that often lead to morning strokes. Months later, I saw Evelyn in her kitchen, using her left hand to guide her right as she stirred a bowl of oats. Her blood pressure had stabilized to a beautiful 122/78, a number that meant her brain was finally out of the red zone. She told me with a soft smile that she never knew the cure could be so delicious or so simple. The tragedy of George Miller had taught us the danger of silence, but Evelyn's recovery taught us the power of action. We don't have to wait for the stroke to start protecting the brain. We can start with the very next meal. Evelyn is living proof that while we cannot change our age, we can absolutely change the environment in which our cells live and breathe. Have you ever felt a sudden, frantic fluttering in your chest, like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage? I remember sitting in a quiet rehab center in Brooklyn, listening to Frank Rossi describe that exact sensation. Frank was 74, a retired postal worker who had walked the streets of New York for 40 years, carrying the weight of the city's mail on his shoulders. He was a man of steel and laughter, someone who had never spent a day in a hospital bed until a minor stroke paralyzed his left side for several hours. The shock in the room was palpable. Frank didn't have high blood pressure, he wasn't overweight, and his cholesterol was within the safe range. But as I placed my stethoscope against his chest, I didn't hear the steady, rhythmic lub-dub of a healthy heart. I heard a chaotic staccato rhythm that signaled a silent predator, atrial fibrillation, or AFib. Frank had felt these flutters for months, but like many men of his generation, he dismissed them as indigestion or the stress of the city. He didn't realize that inside his chest, his heart's upper chambers were no longer pumping. They were quivering, out of sync with the rest of his body. This lack of a coordinated beat allows blood to stagnate in the corners of the heart, where it begins to thicken and form jelly-like clots. In my 30 years of clinical practice, I have seen these clots break loose and travel with terrifying speed directly to the brain. According to the CDC, over 6 million Americans live with AFib, and for those over 80, the prevalence rises to 1 in 10. The strokes caused by AFib are often more severe because the clots are larger, blocking major arteries and leaving behind a trail of profound disability. Frank's face paled as I explained that his minor stroke was a warning shot from a heart that was no longer in control of its own rhythm. Many seniors experience AFib without any symptoms at all, or perhaps just a bit of unexplained fatigue in the afternoon that they attribute to aging. But AFib isn't a normal part of getting older. It is a serious electrical malfunction that turns the heart into a clot-making machine. I have watched too many patients lose their ability to walk or speak because they didn't want to make a fuss about a skipping heartbeat. The tragedy is that this condition often hides, coming and going like a ghost, which makes it difficult to catch without a dedicated EKG or a heart monitor. I watched Frank's wife, Maria, hold his hand, her eyes filled with the fear that the man she had loved for 50 years might skip out on her forever. This is the emotional toll of AFib. It robs a family of their sense of security. I told Frank that we weren't just going to treat his symptoms. We were going to address the underlying inflammation and electrolyte imbalances that were feeding the chaos in his chest. As a doctor who has seen 30,000 patients, I know that we cannot ignore the whispers of the heart. If you feel a flutter, a racing pulse while sitting still, or a sudden weakness after standing up, your body is trying to tell you something vital. Frank's journey wasn't just about recovering from a stroke. It was about reclaiming the rhythm of his life before the next clot could strike. I told Frank Rossi that we were going to turn his kitchen into a sanctuary for his heart's electrical system. While AFib is an electrical issue, it is profoundly influenced by the minerals we consume and the inflammation we allow to simmer in our bodies. I started him on a magnesium and potassium protocol, focusing on the two minerals that act as the heart's natural pacemakers. We added bananas and avocados to his daily routine, providing the potassium necessary to regulate the electrical impulses that tell his heart when to beat. I explained that magnesium is the master mineral for muscle relaxation, including the muscle of the heart. Without it, the heart becomes irritable and prone to the quivering of AFib. We brought in dark leafy greens like kale and Swiss chard, which are concentrated sources of this vital element, to be sautéed in garlic and extra virgin olive oil. We then addressed the fire of inflammation with the power of omega-3s. I encourage Frank to eat wild-caught salmon or sardines at least twice a week. These cold-water fish are loaded with EPA and DHA, fatty acids that stabilize the cell membranes in the heart and prevent the short circuits that lead to irregular rhythms. For a snack, I replaced his salty pretzels with unsalted walnuts and almonds, which are rich in alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that has been shown in clinical trials to lower the risk of heart rhythm disorders. We even discussed the importance of the vagus nerve, the long nerve that connects the brain to the heart. I taught him a simple breathing technique, inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 7, and exhaling for 8, to be done 3 times a day to calm the fight or flight response that often triggers AFib episodes. Hydration became Frank's new obsession. I explained that even mild dehydration can trigger an irregular heartbeat by throwing off the concentration of electrolytes in the blood. He began carrying a water bottle everywhere, aiming for that golden rule of 6 to 8 cups daily. We also looked at his sleep habits, as poor sleep and sleep apnea are major hidden drivers of AFib in seniors. I urged him to avoid caffeine and alcohol after noon, as both can act as excitants to a heart that is already struggling to find its rhythm. We even talked about the emotional heart. Frank started a daily gratitude journal, spending 5 minutes each morning writing down one thing he was thankful for. This wasn't just feel-good advice. Research shows that a positive emotional state can actually lower the heart rate and stabilize its rhythm. Months later, I visited Frank and Maria in their Brooklyn home. Frank was back to walking his male route, not for work, but for pleasure, and his pulse was as steady as a metronome. He looked at me with a vigor I hadn't seen since before his stroke and said he felt like he had a new engine under the hood. He had learned to listen to the whispers of his chest and respond with the nourishment his body was begging for. His story is a testament to the fact that we are not helpless in the face of AFib. By feeding the heart the minerals it needs and calming the nervous system, we can protect the brain from the silent threat of a skipping heart. Frank didn't just survive, he learned how to live in harmony with the rhythm of his own life. Is it possible that the harmless sugar in your blood is actually acting like slow-acting poison to your brain? Margaret Sullivan, a retired school teacher from Scottsdale, Arizona, never thought so. She was 69 years old, a woman who prided herself on staying away from the candy jar and avoiding soda. But Margaret had been living with a hidden reality for over a decade. Her fasting blood sugar was slowly creeping up into the 100 teens, a range doctors call pre-diabetes. She didn't feel thirsty, she didn't have blurry vision, and she certainly didn't feel sick. But while she was living her life, folding laundry and reading to her students, that excess sugar was quietly turning her blood into something thick and corrosive. One afternoon, the silence of her home was broken only by the sound of a basket dropping. Margaret had suffered a stroke that robbed her of her ability to speak in an instant. As her physician, I had to explain to her family the syrup effect. When blood sugar stays high, it damages the delicate endothelial lining of the blood vessels, particularly the tiny, fragile ones deep within the brain. I often tell my 30,000 patients to imagine pouring thick maple syrup through a narrow straw every day. Eventually, the inside becomes sticky, scarred, and narrowed. This damage makes it incredibly easy for blood clots to form and for oxygen-rich blood to be blocked from reaching vital brain tissue. The American Diabetes Association reports that seniors with diabetes are twice as likely to have a stroke, but the danger begins long before a formal diagnosis. Prediabetes is not a waiting room for disease. It is an active state of vascular damage that happens every single hour of the day. Margaret woke up in the hospital unable to say the names of her own grandchildren. Her eyes were wide with a terror that I see all too often, the fear of a mind trapped within a body that no longer responds. She had been borderline for years, but in the medical world, borderline is a warning light that we ignore at our own peril. Many seniors dismiss fatigue or a bit of brain fog as just a natural part of aging, but these are often the early signs of a brain struggling against the sticky tide of high sugar. Research shows that having diabetes for more than 10 years increases your stroke risk exponentially, yet many people don't even know their A1C numbers. Margaret was a victim of the slow creep of sugar, a process that doesn't hurt until it destroys. I sat by her bed holding her hand and promised her that we were going to thin out that syrup and give her brain a chance to heal. We talked about how her 69 years were a treasure we were going to fight to preserve. This wasn't just about a diet, it was about a total reclamation of her neurological health. The tragedy of Margaret's story is that it is so incredibly common in the American Southwest and beyond, where the hidden sugars in processed breads and healthy snacks go unnoticed. But her story is also one of hope, because the brain is remarkably resilient when we give it the right environment. We were going to stop the scarring and start the healing one meal at a time to ensure that the silence she was currently living in wouldn't be her final chapter. I looked at Margaret Sullivan and told her we were going to build a glucose shield around her brain, starting with the very next bite of food. We began with steel-cut oats, a slow-digesting carbohydrate that prevents the dangerous sugar spikes that can damage vessel walls. I insisted she add a generous teaspoon of cinnamon to her morning bowl. Clinical studies have shown that cinnamon can improve insulin sensitivity, helping the body move sugar out of the blood and into the cells where it belongs. We brought in the fiber army, lentils, chickpeas, and black beans to be the foundation of her lunches. Fiber is the ultimate regulator. It slows down the absorption of sugar, ensuring a steady, gentle flow of energy to the brain rather than a chaotic flood that leaves behind a trail of arterial damage. We added plain, unsweetened Greek yogurt topped with a handful of blueberries and raspberries. These berries are rich in polyphenols, which are natural compounds that act like brain armor, protecting the delicate vessels from oxidative stress and inflammation. For her dinners, we focused on dark, leafy greens like spinach and kale, which are high in magnesium, a mineral that has been linked to better blood sugar control in over 60% of clinical trials. I also introduced a secret weapon, a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar diluted in a large glass of water before her largest meal. This simple ritual has been shown to significantly lower the post-meal glucose spike, acting as a natural buffer for her delicate brain chemistry. But the most important part of Margaret's shield was the glucose stroll. I told her that every time she finished a meal, she had to walk for just 15 minutes. This simple act turns the large muscles in the legs into glucose sponges, soaking up the excess sugar from the bloodstream before it has a chance to cause damage. We also addressed her sleep. Poor sleep is a major driver of insulin resistance, so we worked on a routine that ensured she got at least 7 hours of restful, uninterrupted rest. I urged her to avoid any snacks after 7 p.m., allowing her body to enter a state of metabolic rest during the night. We even replaced her evening comfort snacks with a few walnuts, which provide the healthy fats and protein needed to keep her sugar stable until morning.
Months later, Margaret's A1C had dropped from 7.2 to 5.6, placing her back in the healthy range. But the real victory wasn't on the lab report, it was in her voice. She had regained her speech, and though she spoke a little more slowly than before, her mind was clear and her spirit was unbreakable. She told me that she had never felt more in tune with her body, realizing that she had the power to control the chemistry of her own brain. Margaret's story is a powerful reminder that borderline sugar is an invitation to change, not a sentence of despair. By choosing the right foods and moving our bodies, we can thin the syrup in our veins and protect our independence for years to come. Margaret is now back to reading to her students, her voice a steady melody of triumph over the sugar trap.
Have you ever considered that the strength of your legs might be the most important protector of your brain? I remember visiting Aunt Rose Peterson in a quiet corner of Portland, Oregon. Rose was 82, a former seamstress who had spent her life standing over fabric, but in her later years, she had become a captive of the couch. She spent her days watching the rain through her window, her world shrinking to the size of her living room. When I sat with her, I noticed how thin her legs had become, a condition we call sarcopenia, the natural loss of muscle mass that accelerates after the age of 60. But the real danger wasn't just the weakness, it was the frozen flow. I explained to Rose that her leg muscles are her second heart, acting as the primary pumps that push blood back up from her feet against gravity to her heart and brain. When those muscles atrophy from sitting too much, the blood begins to pool in the lower body, becoming stagnant and sluggish. As a physician who has treated 30,000 souls, I have seen how this quiet pond of blood becomes the perfect breeding ground for clots. One morning, Rose stood up too quickly to answer the door, and a clot that had formed in her calf broke free, traveling through her system like a silent missile until it lodged in her brain. She collapsed before she could reach the handle, a victim of a stroke that started in her legs but ended in her mind. Research shows that seniors who sit for more than 8 hours a day have double the risk of stroke, regardless of their other health factors. Leg weakness isn't just a part of getting older. It is a critical warning light that your circulatory system is failing. Rose looked at me from her hospital bed with a profound sense of isolation. She had thought she was resting in her old age, not realizing that her inactivity was actually eroding her safety. Many seniors dismiss calf cramps, morning stiffness, or feeling winded after a few steps as just old age. But these are the symptoms of a body struggling to move its own lifeblood. I have watched too many vibrant people become housebound because they lost the confidence to walk, which in turn accelerated their risk of a catastrophic vascular event. Rose's story is a heartbreaking example of how the easy life of the recliner can be a deadly trap for the elderly. I told Rose that we were going to rebuild her foundation, one small movement at a time. This wasn't about becoming an athlete, it was about reclaiming the pump in her legs to protect the computer in her head. Her stroke was a devastating wake-up call, but it also became an opportunity to teach her that her future was still in her own hands, or rather, her own feet. We had to move the blood, thin out the stagnation, and wake up the muscles that had been frozen for far too long. Rose's journey to recovery would be long, but it started with the realization that movement is not an option. It is the very medicine that keeps our brains alive. I told Rose Peterson that we were going to turn her recovery into a masterclass in resilience, starting with a kitchen counter workout. I had her perform 10 simple heel raises while her morning tea was brewing, a movement that forces the calf muscles to contract and squeeze the deep veins, pushing blood toward the heart. We implemented the 45-minute rule. She was never allowed to sit for more than 45 minutes without standing up for at least 60 seconds to prevent blood from pooling. I also taught her chair squats, where she would slowly lower herself into her favorite chair and then stand back up without using her arms. These simple acts of resistance training are the most powerful ways to combat sarcopenia and keep the circulatory pump of the legs in peak condition.
On her plate, we introduced a muscle and vein protocol. I insisted on 2 boiled eggs and a side of sautéed red kale for breakfast every other day. Eggs provide the high-quality leucine needed for muscle repair, while the nitrates in the kale help dilate the vessels in her legs, making it easier for blood to move. We added baked sweet potatoes topped with roasted pumpkin seeds to her lunches, providing a massive dose of potassium and magnesium to prevent the muscle cramps that often lead to inactivity. I also introduced a daily serving of kefir mixed with chia seeds. The probiotics in the kefir reduce the systemic inflammation that contributes to muscle loss, while the chia seeds provide the omega-3s necessary for healthy nerve-to-muscle communication.
To support her aging joints and connective tissues, I added a scoop of high-quality collagen powder to her evening tea. Collagen provides the building blocks for the tendons and ligaments that keep the legs stable and the stride confident. I also encouraged her to use a simple resistance band for leg lifts while she watched the news, turning her sedentary time into a period of active recovery. We focused on deep hydration throughout the day, as well-hydrated muscles are more efficient and less prone to injury. Rose even started doing ankle rolls and toe taps while she was sitting, a constant, subtle movement that kept her blood in motion even when she wasn't on her feet. A few months later, I visited Rose in Portland and found her in her backyard walking with a steady, confident gait that I hadn't seen in years. She told me she had finally made it back to her mailbox without fear, and the joy in her voice was the greatest reward of my 30-year career. She had learned that her legs were not just for walking, they were the guardians of her brain and her future. By choosing the right foods and committing to micro movements, Rose had effectively lowered her stroke risk and reclaimed her independence. Her story is a shining example for every senior that it is never too late to rebuild your foundation. You don't have to be fast, you just have to be in motion, and your body will reward you with a sharper mind and a longer life. As we reach the final chapter of our journey together, I want to talk to you about the hours when the world is dark and your body is at its most vulnerable. I am Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and after treating 30,000 patients, I have realized that stroke often strikes in the quietest hours of the early morning. I have seen too many families devastated by a midnight stroke that could have been prevented with a few simple nighttime rituals. I taught George, Evelyn, Frank, Margaret, and Rose that their safety doesn't end when the sun goes down. In fact, that is when their vigilance must be highest. We must address the 5 bedtime mistakes that many seniors make, often without even knowing they are putting their brains at risk. First, I urge you never to go to bed dehydrated. Many seniors stop drinking water after dinner to avoid using the bathroom at night, but this causes the blood to thicken like sludge while you sleep, making it incredibly easy for a clot to form in your neck or brain. Drink a small 4 to 6 ounce glass of warm water 30 minutes before bed. It's enough to hydrate your blood without overwhelming your bladder. Second, eliminate the late-night salty snacks like crackers, cheese, or deli meats. That hidden sodium causes a massive spike in blood pressure during the night, a silent surge that can rupture a weakened vessel while you are dreaming. Instead, if you must eat, choose a small banana or a few almonds, foods that are rich in potassium to keep your pressure stable through the night.
Third, never lie down for 8 hours without moving your circulation first. I recommend 5 minutes of pre-sleep movement, ankle rolls, toe taps, or gentle calf stretches to wake up your veins and ensure your blood isn't pooling in your lower body before you go horizontal. Fourth, pay attention to the temperature and your position. A room that is too cold or a sleeping position that is too curled up can cause vasoconstriction, narrowing the arteries that feed your brain. Keep your bedroom at a comfortable 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and use a supportive pillow to keep your neck aligned and your carotid arteries open. Finally, never go to bed with a heart full of anger or a mind full of anxiety. Stress raises your cortisol levels and tightens your blood vessels. Take 3 deep belly breaths and write down one thing you are grateful for to calm your nervous system before sleep.
In summary, we have learned that stroke is not an inevitable consequence of aging. It is a preventable tragedy, whether it is managing the silent killer of high blood pressure, stabilizing a skipping heart, thinning out syrupy blood sugar, clearing out cholesterol plaques, or rebuilding the pump in your legs. The power to protect your brain is in your hands. A bowl of oatmeal, a short walk after dinner, a glass of water before bed. These are the small, quiet acts of love you give to yourself every single day. I have seen 30,000 faces, and I want yours to be one that continues to smile, to speak, and to live with independence for decades to come. Don't wait for a warning shot like George Miller's. Start today, start this very hour with just one small change. If this journey has touched your heart or given you hope, I invite you to join our community of survivors and seekers. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a lesson on how to protect your health and reclaim your life. Share this video with someone you love, a neighbor like George, a friend like Evelyn, or a sibling like Frank, because the gift of awareness is the greatest medicine we can ever share. I am Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and I believe that your best years are not behind you. They are waiting for you to claim them through the wisdom of your choices. Stay strong, stay curious, and most of all, be kind to the heart that beats for you. We will talk again soon.